Okay, today we'll be reading Chapter 6, World War II, Allied and Axis Forces in Never Again Still Means Never Again. The quote on top of the chapter is, quote, "I have been Europe's last hope. She proved incapable of refashioning herself by means of voluntary reform. She showed herself impervious to charm and persuasion. To her, I had to use violence. Asshole Hitler." The quote above is extremely revealing. Hitler either fashioned himself a savior or justified his reason for war. Regardless, his delusions of grandeur pitted nations against nations in one of the most tragic and preventable global blowups in history. If only he had been shot a few times while singing some patriotic songs in his bunker before kicking off World War II, the world would have been a much, much, much saner place. But I digress. Perhaps not everyone is familiar with the World War II Allied forces. Britain and the British Commonwealth, France, not so much, Poland, etc., and how the big three then worked together, the US, Russia, and the UK. I think it's important to note which countries were reluctant to jump in, US primarily, and how these supposed good guys were already aware of the concentration camps but turned a blind eye. Then we seg to the enemy Axis powers, Mussolini and Japan in cahoots with Germany. World War II was initially started by a small group of thugs who may have started out with an ideology for Germany, but it ended up as every other totalitarian dictatorship ends, doing everything for their own personal gains. The devastation they incited led to around 70 million deaths and millions upon millions more wounded. When discussing World War II, we see a huge number of casualties. We see these big, big numbers. And pointing out the obvious, death is final, that's it. Even with the massive number of casualties in World War II, most could go back to someone, but not the Jews. In many parts of Europe, entire communities were wiped out. We were already a small minority in a lot of these European cities. In some cases, it happened in only a few days. Here's a casualty breakdown to provide a better understanding of what the unprovoked Nazis started. World War II, from September 1st, 1939 to May 7th, 1945. The war lasted 5 years, 8 months, and 2 days. In that duration, and using every second, there were over 25 deaths per minute, 1,507 deaths per hour, 36,168 deaths a day, and 253,176 deaths per week in World War II. The fact that the nation of Israel exists today and that Jews from all over the world are alive today is because our surviving ancestors had the intestinal fortitude to carry on. Our World War II ally, the British. For our British brothers and sisters in arms, I honestly don't know how Winston Churchill could get out of bed or off a chair with the immense weight of those two huge brass balls he was carrying around. What a leader. The Brits were very, very fortunate. Chamberlain was afraid of his own shadow. From the beginning, Churchill and the British didn't take any crap from the Nazis. The Brits showed how overwhelmingly tough, charismatic, and brave they were. In the very early part of World War II, the Battle of Britain was fought for 2.5 months. Britain was battered by German bombs multiple times daily. Well, the day before it ended and the day after it ended, the Britons said to Germany, that's it, that's all you got? And something like, let us know when the heavy bombing is going to start. Tough people, don't let their charm and wit fool you. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the people and the leadership of that great country. Those people, that country, their toughness. They were alone, and I mean all by themselves, until Hitler had the bright idea of invading Russia. I would like to highlight one more example of the people. I say people because this is the society that raised these soldiers, and they can hold all of their heads very high. The Battle of St. Nazaire. Whenever a discussion is being held anywhere in the world about toughness, resolve, and character, the Battle of St. Nazaire might be mentioned. Why? There were obviously many, many battles, conflicts, and missions in World War II, but the one I found most impressive was the Battle of St. Nazaire. The St. Nazaire Raid, or Operation Chariot, was a British amphibious attack involving both the Royal Navy and British commandos on a very heavily guarded Normandy dry dock at St. Nazaire in Germany-occupied France. If the British could somehow eliminate that dock, the Germans would have nowhere to repair, refuel, or resupply their large ships outside of Germany. I can't highlight enough how extremely important and vital a military location this was, as proven by their fortification of it, of Germans' fortification of it. Most knew the overwhelmingly odds against this mission. So, before they left for St. Nazaire, the commanding officer did something that's rarely done in war. He told all 611 of his men that if they wanted to, they could recuse themselves from this mission. Quote, there would be no punishment, mocking, or reprisals of any kind, end quote. This was a one-way mission after all. When they were in formation, he barked out, quote, 2 steps forward if you're in this mission, end quote. 1,222 steps were taken. A lot of people don't know this, but the Brits started special operations, commonly referred to as special ops. The Special Air Services, the SAS, was formed in July 1941 from an idea and plan from a world-class badass named David Stirling. In June 1940, in essence, Great Britain revolutionized warfare for the rest of the 20th century and beyond. Those soldiers, along with the rest of Britain's military, were brave, tough, and intelligent. We were fortunate to have them as allies. Our so-called ally, France. First off, I don't think France gets near enough credit for helping the U.S. in the Revolutionary War. They did an outstanding job by helping us with supplies, arms, ammunition, troops, and naval support. We should never forget that. World War II, however, could be the most inept use of military possibly in world history. The French did nothing. Nothing. One can only surmise that the French, and I would guess a high percentage of France, supported the Nazis, and that most of the population sat by and watched. That is really the only logical answer I can come up with. France came out of World War I as a world tiger, but 20 years later, it came out of World War II as a flourless croissant. Look, I get the French were going through economic and political issues, but everyone was. I just find it very hard to believe that as soon as Germany crossed into Austria, they didn't know that they would soon be at war. Furthermore, at a minimum, there was 1 year of mandatory service in France. I don't think that France's leaders were naive or were lacking intel that Germany was building massive amounts of armament, especially at their borders. The Maginot Line did help. However, it was fortified in fixed positions only, and Germany just went around them. There were just way too many holes. How it is remotely possible for France to claim that no one thought the Germans could go through the Ardennes. Like there was a big secret in France about Germany's military equipment. I mean, there just had to be more at play here. The French had more troops, more supplies, and more equipment than the Germans. The French Air Force had a 2-to-1 kill advantage over the Germans. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Germany took over France in what, 6 weeks? The French needed help in the Battle of Bir Hakeim, where their men certainly fought hard, but they couldn't finish it without the Brits, who were needed elsewhere. The French did very well in Elba, but what is Elba? Frenchmen fought bravely in the Colmar pocket, but again, with help from the United States. They came up short on this one, and those soldiers are why I wonder and question France's defense of their home front. Furthermore, what was the percentage of the population that supported the Vichy regime? You had the Legion Imperiale fighting against the Allies. You had the French volunteers against Bolshevism fighting alongside the Nazis in Russia. And then these dirtbags later worked with the Waffen SS. Eventually, and unbelievably, the Legion Imperiale fought alongside the 754th German Panzer Grenadier Regiment in the Battle of Tunisia. I'm sure by now we're confident that all of you white supremacists can't keep your long awaited internal celebrations, wishing you could have volunteered for the SS. However, I am highly confident that you would have had the same ending as most of them. Are you trying to tell people or show someone that you could at least say you were brave enough, or rather dumb enough, to give up your life for a psychotic megalomaniac meth user and his weak-lying underlings consisting of various scumbags like Napoleonic scumbag Goebbels, loudmouth scumbag, all of them, hideous scumbag Himmler, wannabe scumbag Hess, and arrogant scumbag Goering? Congrats, I believe you. In 1939, the French had 900,000 soldiers in service and roughly 5 million men who could have been called up. I really, truly don't get why it was such a mismatch. They were receiving plenty of arms from the U.S., France had 5,800 tanks, almost double the amount of guns in Germany, and roughly the same number of troops. Yet, in 6 weeks, Germany took over your country. I'd get it if you were like Luxembourg, France. Unless we forget, from France alone, 72,500 Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. Our enemy in Italy. Never fear, I haven't left out the schmuck Benito Mussolini. Now it's time for him to shine. So let me introduce you to. If we had a category for the most overrated dictator of all time, it would easily be Mussolini. If Hitler wasn't so hard up for a friend, we would probably never have heard of Mussolini. I think because of Hitler's infectious and lovely personality, along with Mussolini's beautiful flowing Italian accent, and the fact that the Italians were in desperate need of protection from somebody, anybody, this beautiful relationship was struck. Another horrible decision by Hitler was to join Italy for military support. Germany went from babysitting Italy to defending it. Italy brought nothing, I repeat, nothing to the table for Germany. Italy's military had two victories, one prior to World War II. That illustrious initial victory was over Ethiopia. Yes, Italy invaded the military juggernaut of Ethiopia in 1935 to 36, which would become Il Donkey's most successful military campaign ever. Congrats. That campaign was followed by the massive military opponent, Albania. Italy had to somehow overcome the Albanian forces, which consisted of 8,000 troops, 5 aircraft, and 3 boats. Impressive. I probably could have walked over to the local bar in my hometown, found 20 guys to join me, and we would have taken over Albania in a week. However, let's not take this monumental achievement away from the Italians. Full disclosure, I'm not counting their victory against the partisans. Partigiano, meaning civilian party supporters in Yugoslavia, for 2 reasons. One, they had help from Germany with coordination and of Croatia and the Chetnik forces. And 2, well, because they were partisans. Moving along, Daniel Bousted said, quote, the conflicts of the 30s between Italy and their smaller opponents, combined with their Spanish Civil War debt, became too much for them to overcome. By the time they invaded Poland in 1939, they had run out of gold. And by the time they declared war on France, their military was so inept, various units were spying on one another. By 1940, the Italians couldn't supply uniforms or equipment to its troops. Hitler became more demanding and frustrated at Mussolini about the, quote, help, unquote, Germany needed from Italy, while Mussolini continued to tell him he needed more time to build up his forces. Fine, we get it, it happens. However, the arrogance and bolstering that Mussolini continually displayed while basically overseeing the Boy Scouts is just another example of a dictator running wild. Furthermore, Mussolini is the case study on why fascism is crap. Anyway, as bad as that was, here are Italy's other results in World War II. Egypt, lost. Palestine, dropped some bombs and hurried out, lost. Greece, lost. Sicily, lost. Italian East Africa, lost. North Africa, lost. Tunisian campaign, lost and got their butts kicked. Mussolini couldn't get to a phone fast enough to beg Hitler for help. Hitler sent in his Africa Corps, led by a very good general, Erman Rommel, who was beloved by his troops and German citizens. Later in the war, Hitler was kind enough to give Rommel the option of being killed or killing himself. The country of Montenegro, we'll call it a tie. Italians claimed victory, but you can decide. Italy sent in 10 units, which consisted of around 70,000 soldiers. This victory was against, ready for it, again, partisans. They weren't fighting a country or an allied territory. As mentioned, partisans are made up of civilians who are very angry or fed up, and this group had few partisans with any military background. Anyway, these partisans went up against 70,000 Italian soldiers and fought to a draw. On July 25th, 1943, Il Duce was voted out of office and shortly thereafter was imprisoned. Guess which country joined the Allies after that? Yet. So Il Dummy is eventually rescued by a German unit and brought back to Germany. Hitler tells him he looks horrible and asks Il Duce, why aren't you going after the Italians who put you in this predicament? Hitler is adamant that Mussolini start some type of Italian movement government while in exile. Mussolini agreed to take up a new government and called it the, quote, Duce of the Italian Social Republic, end quote. Of course, it was a German puppet state, but, details. Anyhow, for all intents and purposes, this was basically German control. It lasted about 19 months while Il Drama Queen was on house arrest by the SS. Near the end, Mussolini wrote his memoirs, like anyone would really care, but surprisingly, though, it seems he finally got honest with himself. He wrote, quote, 7 years ago, I was an interesting person. Now, I'm a little more than a corpse, end quote. Shortly thereafter, Mussolini didn't know what to do, and it wasn't long until he and his mistress were caught by some partisans trying to flee to Switzerland. The next day, Mussolini and his mistress were shot along with the others from his ministry department. The bodies were brought to Milan, and after being kicked and spit on, they were hung upside down in the Piazza Square so they could be stoned and peed on. He was eventually buried in an unmarked grave. His corpse was later dug up by some obvious morons who buried him in his hometown. So there you have it. Mussolini was Hitler's main ally and only friend of the Axis coalition. Just let that sink in. Mussolini was just another narcissistic psychopath whose decisions did only one thing: enrich himself and other high ranking officials. I could somewhat understand how Hitler got to power. However, I will never fully understand how Mussolini did. The Italian people have always been genial, nice, caring, passionate, etc. Yet this clown somehow meandered his way into ruling them and then entering the Axis party. Who we surround ourselves with has always been a reflection of us as individuals. Hitler with Mussolini and Mussolini with Hitler must be considered one of the highest ranking narcissistic friendships in political history. And that's saying something and worthy of recognition. But to me, it was like an incestuous ideology of narcissism. And in the end, at least they went out with their real personalities intact. Cowards. How early into 1944 did Hitler or his generals realize it was probably a bad idea to have killed all his Jewish scientists and mathematicians? Invasion of Russia. The fight against Jewish world Bolshevization requires a clear attitude towards Soviet Russia. You cannot drive out the devil with a Beelzebub. Yes, this is another quote by Hitler. Quote, the war against Russia will be such that it cannot be conducted in a knightly fashion. This struggle is one of the ideologies and racial differences and will have to be conducted with unprecedented, unmerciful, and unrelenting harshness. All officers will have to rid themselves of obsolete ideologies. I know that the necessity for such means of waging war is beyond the comprehension of you generals, but I insist absolutely that my orders be executed without contradiction. End quote. Add megalomaniac to his long list of psychoses. This madman, the hero of today's racists and neo Nazis, was just starting up his was just starting up his experimentations with various drugs while contemplating invading Russia. The horrific decision begs the question, quote, what was Hitler addicted to? End quote. As it takes a while to get the correct timing down, going from heroin to meth, meth to heroin, and he could have been trying to adjust the right cycle. So that takes time, and I get it. Think about the decisions we make stoned. Maybe stealing some M&Ms, driving while high, fecal impaction, all serious issues with consequences. However, I'm confident no one has ever decided to invade a country with over 200 million people. Despite the outbreak of war, Hitler continued his policy of aggression. By May of 1940, Britain was the only Western European country that had not been overrun by the Nazis. Hitler lost the Battle of Britain and pivoted to an invasion of Russia. By now, there was a long list of undesirables who endured terrible fates under Hitler: Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, communists, the handicapped, both physically and mentally, and others were forced to wear identification badges. Jews were just starting to be sent to concentration camps to either be exterminated in gas chambers or forced into labor. In January 1942, plans were approved to exterminate the entire Jewish population, known as the Final Solution. I'll be covering World War II in depth later in the book. Suffice it to say here that World War II pitted the US led allies, UK, France, and the Soviet Union, against the German led Axis, Italy, and Japan. Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, and marked the start of World War II. It lasted until Germany unconditionally surrendered on May 7th, 1945. So, we've taken a quick look at how crazy Hitler was and have highlighted the subordinates under him. However, I think the biggest example of how stupid, ignorant, and world class narcissistic Hitler was would be the command he gave to attack the Soviet Union on June 22nd, 1941. Hitler had very successfully occupied Poland, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Norway, and France. They had a signed pact with Russia, and there was no indication that Russia was using this time to aggressively build up its armaments. Outside of Hitler's psychosis and fevered ravings about communism, there were zero reasons to invade Russia at that time. And if he was going to attack Russia, all the idiot had to do was simply wait until winter was over to invade. That's pretty much all. I mean, the moron crossed into Russia in late June. Did he think he was going to take Russia in 4 months? In that time, soldiers could have healed, another round of Hitler Youth would be ready, and they could have obviously had time to repair equipment, receive new planes, artillery, and other weapons. But the biggest advantage would have to been to keep their soldiers out of Russia during winter. Zero reasons for him not to wait until March, April, or early May for the invasion. Winter or not, if there is any sound, somewhat intelligent, Aryan, white supremacist, or anti Semite reading this, tell me why this wasn't arguably one of the dumbest military decisions in modern warfare by a mile. The only sliver of an argument was that the Germans were trying to take the Soviet oil fields, but it was way too far inland for the German military and borderline impossible during the winter. Furthermore, when they attacked the Soviet Union, they had no long term supply chain. Let's say one of you racists was fighting for hair, no chance to take Russia, and blitzkrieg your way to Stalingrad in a tank. You and your unit finally get there, and there is no food, ammunition, or even blankets. Remember, your hero sent you out there, your leader. This extremely premature conflict cost 830,000 German soldiers' lives. I'm just baffled at how naive you white supremacists are. But it's just as bad as the clown show of Hitler's subordinates. Your opinions may somewhat matter in your hate groups and your hate group plans, chat rooms, and meetings, but your opinions would have slowly dissipated into a kissing up affection under Nazism. It was truly all about kissing ass. Germany starved to death or killed 3.3 million Soviets. Germany's excuse was that they didn't think that they would capture so many so quickly. What? That's your reason? You think Hitler or any Nazis lifted a finger to help one Russian? Hitler didn't care and was probably disappointed at such a low number. And why did Germany attack in the first place? Because the Russians were communists? It's going to be a long, long time until we see someone as psychotic, selfish, ignorant, and mentally deranged as Hitler running a country in Europe. Finally, if you're going to bum rush the country, you may want to consider who you are attacking. After all, the stuff Joseph Stalin had been doing to his own people, did Hitler really think they were just going to moonwalk into Moscow? The Russian people are tough, really tough. And by the time Stalingrad became an issue, Stalin would have forced his 90-year-old housekeeper to aim and fire. He already had women sharpshooters killing Nazis. I bring this up to show you the mentality of your hero, Hitler, and how this was such an idiotic and extremely toxic move for the German army. In my opinion, the day the first German soldier put his foot into Russia, World War II was over. Stalingrad. Now, let's discuss Stalingrad to further unveil the Russians' tough and relentless reputation. It's easy to justify their victory in Stalingrad by saying that they simply continued to send manpower. However, these troops came in staggered waves and would have been very easy for them to give up. Fortunately, they never wavered. Had the Nazis taken Stalingrad, the outcome of the war would have been different. I think the Allies still win, but at what cost? I will be highlighting Hitler's psychotic, consistent tendencies, and I just need you anti-Semitic, Aryan, white supremacists to understand that I lump all of you together with Hitler. If you believe in him and his philosophies and are trying to finish whatever you think he stood for, then to me, you're the same. Hitler should have never, ever, ever invaded Russia. By the middle of April 1945, the Russians were bombing, and more bombing in Berlin. Around this time, Hitler had taken his last breath of fresh air outside, and there's a tradition that a soldier is honored by being shot to death. Hangings and beheadings were for everyone else. So, and not to be outdone, for the first time in history, before or since, Hitler became the first head of a country to kill himself by cyanide, shooting, and fire. I'm confident he'll hold that record for a long time. Congrats, coward. You hit the death trifecta. Even he wanted to make sure he was dead. Wait, I said what? Moralize, quotes from Hair Lowlife. Quote, humanitarianism is the expression of stupidity and cowardice, unquote. I wonder how many other countries were vying for Hitler's leadership. This might be my favorite quote from Hitler. The lying coward, Hitler. Quote, anyone can deal with victory. Only the mighty can bear defeat. End quote. If by mighty you mean turning yourself into a human charcoal pit, then yes, you bore defeat like a champ. Reality wise, it turned out that Hitler wasn't such a gracious loser in the end and refused to take responsibility for his defeat. He blamed his followers. Quote, it is not I who lost the war, it was the German people. End quote. He said, quote, I await my death as a release from a hard life of difficulties. End quote. What a psychotic wimp. He ran a country, became a multi-billionaire, and he was awaiting death from a hard life of difficulties. He had millions of babies and little children intentionally murdered, among thousands of atrocities, and in the end, he could still only think about himself. Here's another reason why Hitler was full of it. In Mein Kampf, he talks about how he was sympathetic to the people who were being hurt or intimidated. Quote, the more I understood the methods of physical intimidation that were employed, the more sympathy I had for the multitude that had succumbed to it. End quote. I mean, he has to be joking. This is from the guy who just couldn't intimidate, torture, and kill enough people. For those who say, yay, I follow Hitler and his doctrines. He's brilliant and tough and so great for the white race. White power, white power. What dramatic losers you are. You are idolizing a coward with mental illness, a mental illness that he sent millions to the gas chamber for. What does this say about you? You know that things about shooting himself? Um, my guess is it took him 3 tries. Oh, wait, here's the good one. Now, mind you, I have no idea what did or didn't qualify as comedy in Germany around the mid 1940s, but this is just comic genius. Guy Liddell, a British intelligence officer, wrote in his diaries about a letter from Joachim von Ribbentrop, who is German foreign minister, and I quote, he said that neither he nor Hitler had ever wanted a war with England, and that he himself had always regarded England as his second home. He was sure the future lay in close collaboration between England and Germany. End quote. I really don't know what to say about this, but I really, really hope that Churchill got to read that. While we're here, let's just throw out some more quotes from the favorite leader of today's neo-Nazis, hair fabricator. You Aryans can see for yourselves why nobody respects your organizations. You're being led by a theoretical ideology that's only proven outcome so far is that it doesn't work. By now, you know Hitler is just a psychotic murderer who took the idea of Nazism to its highest level and let the world witness how it failed miserably. When you add Hitler's stealing and looting billions upon billions of dollars for himself, his shocking number of atrocities, and how he started a war that ended 70 million lives, perhaps you'll update your ideology to something saner. Why would you and your anti Semitic racist friends want to continue to pursue this? What can you show us in his 12-year reign of disasters that you want to emulate? What were the positives? Quote, when diplomacy ends, war begins. That's your boy, Hitler. How about this? Now, this is a government we can all get behind. Quote, the great strength of the totalitarian state is that it forces those who fear it to imitate it. End quote. Here's one I've never heard. Quote, conscience is a Jewish invention. End quote. Well, he finally admits it. My gosh, is there anything us Jews can't do? Near the end of the war, the Germans were training and using young boys and the elderly as soldiers. For the millionth time, clearly, this war was way, way over. But it at least shows that Hitler didn't discriminate and was kind enough to include all ages in his killings. Also, around this time, Hitler got to unleash his last few brilliant edicts for his beloved German citizens. You ready for these? Basically, he's about to die. This is the time frame when he already knows it's over. Hitler demanded that the battle he started, quote, be conducted without consideration of our own population, end quote. So what did he do? He ordered the destruction of all industrial plants, the main electricity works, the main water works, and the main gas works. He ordered that all foods and clothing stores create a desert for the advancing Allies. Herr Selfish declared, quote, "If the war is lost, the German nation shall also perish. There is no need to consider what the people required for continued existence." End quote. What a guy. What a leader. What an asshole. You, the Aryan nation, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, etc., need to see and understand what most of us have already seen in his nature, attitude, and outlook. Why would you advance his bloody cause? Is he the Pied Piper even in death? And you, the mesmerized little boys and girls who follow him, to all his racist military types, is this a guy you would have wanted to go to war for? Whatever thoughts he had for Germany and Austria at one time, or even some early ideas he once wrote in Mein Kampf, went away as soon as he came into power. Gone. He immediately switched to power and me mode. All dictators do. From Idi Amin, Saddam Hussein, all of them. Pick one. Any dictator you like. Furthermore, his entire rule over Germany came so quickly and easily that I suspect his thoughts turned to, why not the rest of the world? Can you imagine him speaking to the Germans at this point? Hi, this is the Fuhrer. Sorry, I caused a little damage to our city, but I only cost the lives of about 5 million soldiers and 5.7 million civilians. Anyway, we're not going to surrender, so just go back to bed. If a bomb is dropped on you, no sweat, I'll already be asleep because I'm 50 feet underground with 20 feet of concrete, and I'm taking about 2,000 milligrams of Seroquel before bed. It's important for all of you to understand that I must get my sleep. I hope this clears it up. Yeah. Still slinging saliva, I can envision him also spitting out, look, what I've given to you all over the last 12 years. You should be way more grateful. Again, go back to bed because there's nothing you can do. And you won't see them coming anyways. More importantly, and you better not forget, make sure you're getting in your 150 Heil Hitler salutes a day. German deaths from air raids totaled 126,000 after January 31st, 1945. Ironically enough, when Hitler got up from his 13 hours of sleep, he was heard saying, I figured, I'm still alive, so I must be doing something right. And just to shut all you Germans up, here is my more important than yours schedule. I wake up at noon and take a nap. I get up in the afternoon, I snort some meth, and play with my dogs. Man, they cute. I haven't had much food in the last couple of years as I've been diligently writing a book that I'm going to call the Mein Meth Diet. It's another gift I'm giving my fiefdom. Early evening, I took some coke, PCP. I followed it up with some more coke late at night because that's when I'm working. Work, work, work. For Germany and the Nazis. All right, good night. I'm going to bed. Jews, racists, homosexuals, political and religious persecution, and 200,000 German people with disabilities all were sent to concentration camps and died through the T4 program or euthanasia. I imagine these thoughts were rolling around in Hitler's brain. Listen, they were disabled. I obviously did them a favor. So again, you're welcome. I really enjoyed bringing up the murderers and the disabled at parties. It's fun. As we inch closer to Hitler's one alarm personal fire drill to put out his black on black on black charred body, he somehow made the time to get with Goebbels to celebrate FDR's death. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, our president. Celebrate his death. That's a laugh. FDR spearheaded helping to avenge Pearl Harbor and kick the crap out of Germany. He died comfortably, and his funeral was attended by hundreds of thousands. Hitler, however, ended up dead after swallowing cyanide and then using a pistol on his diseased brain. His dead body was then brought up from his bunker, laid onto a pit, and set on fire. So this scumbag ends up with 50-degree burns, laying on the street with his mouth wide open as his ashes littered and dirtied the pavement, which is now a site of a parking garage. Well, it's open to the public, so anyone can run over and pee on him too. Those two sociopaths, Hitler and Goebbels, laughing at FDR, kind of sums it up. Thank you.